Is there anyone that wishes to say anything? If they have any expectations, any kinds of ideas that we should discuss today, but please make it brief. Yes, sir, please, in the green shirt, but please make it very brief. Thank you.
Hello, good morning, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished dignitaries, and also fellow civil society organizations. I'm really honored to be here. My expectations as the founder of Go Green organization, which we deal with environmental conservation and youth leadership. We have been facing a lot of challenges on fundings, though we have a great ideas. So my questions to all concerned on today's discussion is if you guys will be able to deliberate on how we can be able to, receive some, proposals that actually can be able to recognize our good job.
Thank you. Thank you for the thing. We will take note on that.
Last one, if we can also discuss on the AI model, which is actually using currently onto integrating and protecting our data privacy. So yeah, I have a lot, but I think those two, if you can be able to handle them, I would really appreciate, sir. Please.
Okay. Thank you, sir. That will be all. Thank you. You may please be seated. Thank you very much for the inputs. Yep. Take note. We will be taking note on your concerns regarding digital technology for energy transition, and then the other point that you mentioned about financing. Thank you. And now I would like to do a mic check. Miss Lee Cohen, can you now hear us? Apologize for the technical difficulties. Okay, now from London, we would like to invite Miss Lee Cohen to deliver her opening remarks. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Samuel. Distinguished speakers, colleagues, youth participants joining from across the world, thank you for joining us at this very timely session. My name is Cohen Lee, and I am a co-facilitator of the Green Economy and Resources Working Group alongside Samuel, and it is our great pleasure to have you here at the session today. As you are all aware, our session is on critical minerals governance and technologies, and our pathways to transition towards a responsible mineral resources stewardship. Critical minerals, including metallic minerals, rare earths, are undoubtedly one of the core resources that underpin our economic activities. As you were just intervening, from manufacturing to energy to technology, the global demand for minerals is surging, and we are also witnessing the global digital transformation with the AI expansion at the front runner. So we can expect the race for the critical minerals demands and to secure supplies will only heighten, including minerals such as lithium, cobalt, nickel, rare earths. So as the country demands are steadily growing, and the green energy transition also proves to be mineral intensive, like the International Resource Panel co-chair Janez Potocznik points out, the green economy transition will be a shift from the fossil fuels-based economy to the minerals-based economy. And while the demand for minerals is continuously rising, the virgin materials mining, refining, and processing are at the same time dominated by only a handful of countries. And they are also, the demand is only being driven by the richest economies around the world. And hence the unchecked levels of mineral extractivism, as well as their stark environmental, social prices, are borne disproportionately by the nature of and people of the global south, including the indigenous communities. And so to navigate this volatile minerals production ecosystem, countries are exploring different options such as deep sea mining, national stockpiling, which in fact can only worsen the lopsided competition and inequitable access to minerals. And that is why this session will be exploring the minerals, development, and environment nexus. And it will explore both the supply and demand side approaches, which can help transition from minerals extractivism to global responsible minerals stewardship. And these conversations will include pathways to diversify minerals production by expanding the sector-specific minerals, such as recycling and reintegration. But at the same time, we also highlight the necessity to incorporate the principles of sufficiency into our mining and consumption activities. Today, you will hear from Ms. Sara Jusa, a minerals and metals specialist from UNEP, on the overview of our current minerals context. And you will also be joined by 4 awesome speakers around the world from diverse backgrounds during the panel discussion, where we address the barriers to transitioning to mineral stewardship, as well as the impact of extractive activities to communities and indigenous peoples, and some industry-led insights that we hear from on the ground. So as YEA-7 begins, this is a very pivotal moment for the world and for youth activists and participants around the world. And with global attention on resource use, circularity, environmental governance, our collective efforts can shift the norms, priorities, and policy trajectories. And so therefore, our session is not only the exchange of perspectives, it is an essential building block in shaping youth-led inputs. So with that, I thank you again very much for joining, and I will pass back on to moderator Samuel. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Cohen, for the opening remarks that has set the context of today's discussion. Again, I would like to remind everyone for the housekeeping rules to keep your phones on silent mode, and then we will be having a series of panel discussion, and then we'll proceed with the open floor later on, where you guys can participate actively and deliver your suggestions, insights, as well as questions to the speakers. But before we begin the panel discussion, we would like to set the tone of today's proceeding, and I would like to allow for the United Nations Environmental Programme to deliver their keynote presentation that will be delivered by Ms. Sauda Jousa, the Minerals and Metals Specialist from the United Nations Environmental Programme. So, Ms. Sauda, please, you may deliver your remarks that will highlight the overview of current mineral context, demand, supply, and environmental and social costs of mineral extractivism, as well as how can we push for greater responsible supply chain, as well as sustainable management of minerals that upholds the principles, let's say, like sufficiency, efficient material extraction, and yeah, you may have the floor. You may please join us in the lectern to deliver your keynote presentation. Thank you. Round of applause, please, to UNEP.
Just testing if my mic is on. Greetings, everyone. Thank you very much, Samuel. So why do minerals matter for the energy transition? To set the scene, I think as many speakers have done before, it's important to remember that the global energy system is still overwhelmingly powered by fossil fuels, around 80% actually. And achieving climate goals, therefore, requires an unprecedented scale up of renewable technologies. And these technologies, as you can see on the illustration on the right, solar panels, wind turbines, electrical vehicles, battery storage, and electricity transmission grids, they're all highly mineral intensive. And their deployment depends on a reliable and sustainable supply of minerals such as copper, such as lithium, such as cobalt, nickel, rare earth elements, and many others. As a result, equipping the world for a net zero pathway by 2050 will require a substantial increase in mineral production. So current analysis suggests that demand for key transition minerals could rise by as much as 6 times compared to 2022 levels. This combination of rapid demand growth, mineral intensity, and the need for sustainability is what makes minerals central to the global energy transition. And that is why our discussion today is very important. So the entire presentation is drawn from a paper by UNEP titled Critical Transitions. And I will share the links in my presentation with the facilitators to circulate much later. So UNEP's working paper on critical transitions highlights that a defined group of 26 transition minerals is essential for renewable energy inputs. And of course, I had mentioned these include lithium, cobalt, nickel, and graphite copper. And they underpin batteries for electrical vehicles, for wind turbines, for solar transmission. And the International Energy Agency net zero by 2050 scenario cited also in the paper, it shows just how steep these increases could be by 2040. For example, lithium demand could rise by as much as 42 times compared to today. Graphite, for example, is projected to increase by 25 times, cobalt by 21 times, nickel by 19 times, and rare earth elements by almost 7 times. And these minerals are at the heart of the technologies that are needed for decarbonization, and this is why demand accelerates so rapidly. The scale of this growth is also driven by mineral intensity. So, for example, electric vehicles require more than 200 kgs of minerals per unit, and compared with roughly 35 kilograms for a conventional internal combustion car. And onshore wind turbines use around 9 times more minerals per unit of energy produced than natural gas-fired power generation. Altogether, these projections illustrate both the magnitude of future mineral demand and the central of minerals in achieving the global energy transition. Next slide, please. Thank you. So in the UNEP working paper on critical transitions as well, it shows that mineral supply is structurally vulnerable because production and processing are extremely concentrated. For example, about half of the global cobalt comes from the DRC, and nearly 80% of lithium comes from Australia, Chile, Argentina. Processing is even more concentrated in China, refining 40% of global copper, 58% of lithium, 65% of cobalt, and almost all rare earth elements are concentrated in one region in terms of processing. And this means that a very small number of jurisdictions underpin the global energy transition, and any instability, export restriction, or market disruption in these areas, they have great ripple effects and global impacts. We also see rising geopolitical pressures, including a 5-fold increase in mineral export restrictions since 2009. Along with volatile prices and the fact that some major producers are in fragile, conflict-affected regions. And together, these factors make the supply system highly sensitive to political and market shocks. There are several physical and environmental barriers that can limit how quickly supply can grow and have been highlighted. First, new mines take an exceptionally long time, and studies say on average 16 years from discovery to production. And this means that supply simply cannot expand at the pace that it is needed. And second, ore grades are declining. For example, copper grades in some studies have fallen from 0.53% in current operations to about 0.39% in new projects. So these lower grades will often require, of course, more mining, more rock, more water, more energy, and this leads to high emissions and more waste. And third, more than half of the lithium and copper production is located in high water stress regions, and mining regions are increasingly exposed to droughts, to heat waves, to flooding, and these directly threaten production. And finally, significant potential shortfalls by 2030 have also been noted, including graphite at 45%, cobalt at 40%, lithium at 30%, and these gaps could constrain renewable deployment if not addressed. Mineral extraction and processing have significant environmental impacts across the entire life cycle. First, in terms of land disturbance and biodiversity loss. So surface mining has one of the highest levels of ecosystem disruption per unit area, especially when multiple sites expand within the same landscape. And second, we see major challenges associated with tailings and waste. As ore grades decline, tailings volumes continue to grow, increasing long-term contamination risks. And tailings storage has also been associated with accidents and legacy impacts that can affect soil, water, and downstream communities for decades. And third, the sector is extremely water intensive and high water withdrawals, particularly in already water stressed regions. And these accelerate the scarcity and heighten the risk of chemical contamination and leachates entering the local water systems for communities. And fourth, mining and processing generate substantial greenhouse gas emissions. So as ores become lower grade, more energy is required per ton of metal. And without interventions, mining-related emissions are obviously expected to rise. And finally, many of these impacts are cumulative within the same ecosystem. So where multiple mines cluster within the same ecosystem, the combined pressures on land, on water, on biodiversity, they all become significantly greater. And altogether, these environmental costs underline the importance of integrating stronger safeguards, efficiency measures, and circularity across the full life cycle. Social risks are also particularly present for women, for children, indigenous peoples, and communities living near mining sites. First, we see clear, next slide, sorry. First, we see clear gendered impacts. Women are disproportionately affected by mining operations, and this facing increased exposure to gender-based violence, disruptions in livelihood, and unequal access to economic benefits generated by the sector. Second, there are ongoing risks of child labor, especially in parts of cobalt supply chains and some artisanal mining contexts. This raises major concerns around human rights and responsible sourcing. Thirdly, mining expansion often leads to community displacement. This includes the risk of relocation, land disputes, and cases where compensation or consultation is insufficient or inequitable. And fourth, indigenous rights are particularly affected. Approximately 68% of non-transition mineral projects overlap with indigenous or community lands. Technology, circularity, and responsible practices can significantly reduce the amount of minerals required for the energy transition, starting with efficiency. So technological choices such as low cobalt or zero cobalt battery chemistries have already cut projected cobalt by almost half. And improvements in battery energy density are also important, with projected increases from around 160 to 250 kilowatt hours per kilogram, enabling the same vehicle range with about 35% less material. And renewable energy technologies overall are in a period of dynamic improvement, which continues to reduce mineral intensity per unit of output. And on circularity, several pathways are highlighted in the model shown on the screen. Substitution is one. So graphite, for example, can be produced synthetically or substituted with silicon or lithium. And retaining products for longer also matters. So solar panels last about 25 to 30 years, and wind turbines could last about 20 years as well. So reducing turnover and obviously therefore demand. Reuse is also key. So electric vehicle batteries can still provide an additional 10 to 15 years of service when repurposed as stationary storage. Recovery of minerals from tailings and co-products is another opportunity, particularly in regions with extensive legacy tailing sites. And recycling can make a major contribution in some countries. Secondary production already contributes up to 50% of nickel and more than a third of copper and cobalt. Responsibility is the third pillar. Strengthening governance, environmental and social safeguards, human rights due diligence, and community participation, of course, including free, prior, and informed consent, is essential, ensuring that mineral supply chains support rather than undermine a just transition. When combined, these measures have a significant impact. So technological efficiency improvements can reduce cumulative mineral demand by around 30%. Circularity measures can reduce it by another 18%, and together these pathways can reduce overall mineral needs by almost half compared to the business as usual scenario. So achieving a sustainable energy transition is not only about volumes of minerals or efficiencies in extraction. Governance and equity must be at the center of the transition. If we want it to be both environmentally sound and socially just, first, stronger environmental and social safeguards are essential. So without clear requirements on water management, on biodiversity protection, on tailing safety, on gender equality and human rights. The pressures we've discussed earlier or that I've mentioned earlier will intensify, as demand grows. And second, international coordination is increasingly important. So mineral supply chains are global, and transparency, traceability, and aligned standards help reduce risks while supporting responsible sourcing. Third, producing countries, including many developing economies, need support to strengthen domestic governance systems, technical capacity, and economic diversification. This helps ensure that mineral wealth contributes to long-term sustainable development rather than reinforcing dependency. Fourth, equity must be embedded across mineral supply chains. Communities, indigenous peoples, and women often bear disproportionate burdens and yet receive limited benefits. So a just transition requires meaningful participation, respect for rights, and a fair distribution of economic gains. And finally, responsible production and due diligence are critical, particularly as supply expands into new regions and more complex deposits. So clear guidance, standards, and monitoring can help ensure that growth in mineral supply chains does not undermine these environmental or social objectives. The overarching message from UNEP is that secure and sustainable mineral future relies not just on mining, but also on governing minerals better with responsibility, with transparency, and with equity at its core. So the role of the UN or the UN system or UNEP can be summed up as setting global norms and driving multilateral action, providing scientific evidence and analysis, for example, through the International Resource Panel, strengthening national capacity and institutional frameworks, facilitating cooperation and partnerships, supporting global governance processes, and providing access to information and tools. So UNEP's work on minerals and metals is guided by a set of mandates from the UNEA Resolution 419, 512, and most recently 65. Under Resolution 65, UNEP was asked to take forward several core functions, and these include enhancing cooperation and partnerships among member states and stakeholders, supporting capacity building and developing a digital knowledge hub, which was launched last week, to provide a single structured space that brings together guidance, data, tools, good practices, and environmental aspects of minerals on environmental aspects of minerals and metals. And it also enables cooperation and peer-to-peer exchange through dedicated communities and interactive features. So I invite you to visit the UNEA 65 Digital Knowledge Hub and just explore it. And your feedback is also very much welcome. In terms of cooperation and partnerships, UNEP works with a number of key institutions. So we collaborate with the Intergovernmental Forum on Mining, Minerals and Metals and Sustainable Development, IGF, under a Memorandum of Understanding to support capacity building and knowledge development. In 2024, UNEP and the African Union, through the Africa Minerals Development Center and the IGF, jointly delivered training for national focal points on environmental impact assessment and strategic environmental assessments, including mine closure. And this is part of our capacity building efforts under the mandate. And on knowledge products, UNEP has produced the critical transitions working paper, circularity, equity, and responsibility in the quest for energy transition minerals, which has informed the analysis that was presented today. And last week, UNEP, together with the IGF, we launched the report on sustainability standards and initiatives, which is often referred to as SSI. You are free to look at that as well. I will share the link with the facilitators, which maps the rapidly evolving landscape of voluntary and public standards for minerals and metals. And finally, UNEP also provided technical inputs to the United Nations Secretary General's panel on critical energy transition minerals. And through these efforts, UNEP is helping member states strengthen governance, cooperation, and knowledge sharing with regards to environmental aspects of minerals and metals sector in line with the mandates of YEA. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Please, everyone, give her a round of applause. You may please be back to your seat. Thank you very much for highlighting a clear presentation where you highlight that, yet supply is fragile due to the concentrated production. And you also highlight geopolitical pressure, volatile markets, structural barriers. And then, you also mentioned here not only the market side, but also you mentioned that a just transition is also needed, and it could be done through stronger governance, safeguards, international cooperation, and also you also highlight UNEP's contribution in various fora, both in the implementation of the past UNEP resolution, and I would like to also personally congratulate UNEP for the launch of the SSI report that you guys just launched on the 27th of November. So yeah, please, you may be seated again. Thank you. I will now, before we move forward to the panel discussion, I just want to ask Sauda really briefly, and if you could tackle this question really briefly before we proceed. What is the role of technology? I mean, our our theme of today's session is clear: technology and governance. We have discussed more on the governance side, but how about the technology? Thank you.
Okay. So of course, technology plays a critical role and a cross-cutting role in improving transparency and environmental protection, traceability, efficiency, and accountability across mineral value chains. It strengthens, of course, governance systems, operational practices, helping enable countries and companies to manage minerals in ways that are responsible, that are low impact, that are aligned with global sustainability goals. So of course, as I mentioned, the first, enhancing transparency and traceability through technologies such as blockchain, digital passports, satellite monitoring, Internet of Things, sensors, and these all together create verifiable and tamper-proof records of mineral origin, movement, and environmental performance. And this helps governments and stakeholders ensure that minerals are sourced responsibly, they're free from conflict, free from corruption, human rights abuses, and compliant with environmental regulations. So very briefly.
Thank you. Thank you, Sauda. I think you highlighted an important thing. For example, the example of technology that you just mentioned now, passport, or maybe, ways to increase traceability of the mineral products, maybe from the extraction, and then we can, for example, if the minerals are turned into the final products, we can trace the origins of the resources that compose the final product. Thank you. Now I would like to move forward to Gyubin Huang, Partnership and Outreach Lead of CYMG, and I have to mention this also that he was also an expert in the International Energy Agency, previously working on energy issues, commodities, including critical minerals and its nexuses. So Gyubin, a dear friend of mine, Gyubin, I would like to ask you a question, maybe from the youth perspective. What do you think are the biggest bottlenecks for transitioning away from mineral extractivism and moving forward closer to mineral stewardship? Thank you, Gyubin.
Thanks for that, Samuel. So before I start, I'd just like to note that a lot of the numbers in Sauda's presentation come from the IEA data, and it's really lovely to see the wide-ranging impact of IEA analysis. And I think from a youth perspective, when we think about extractivism, as you noted, we are moving from extracting, well, we're not really moving. We are, in addition to extracting coal and oil and gas, we are extracting more and more metal from the ground. So it's a additive extractive process. I think this whole thing is predicated, as we discussed in yesterday's session on the financial system, on a miscalibrated system. So we are misvaluing wealth. If you look at the four capitals model, once again, we are burning up social capital, human capital, natural capital, all for the purpose of increasing GDP, which is a flow of wealth from these existing natural assets, different capitals, to what we call economic activity and development. And so until we change the economic models to account for the true cost of extracting from the other capitals to increase financial capital, we will not be. Extractivism is simply the correct thing to do under this framework. The second thing, of course, is how this ties into standards of living. There are many parts of the world where the standard of living of development still has a lot of room to grow. And these communities indeed should have the right to development, the right to more material wealth and consumption, whereas many parts of the global north should, in absolute terms, reduce their resource consumption. And so we have this misallocation of resources, of assets, of risks that are being posed by different actors in the system. And until we figure out what green development, green growth means, and how we can, have a better quality of life as the overarching perspective rather than more GDP or more financial wealth, I think it'll be difficult to move away from the current system. The third thing, of course, is the intergenerational lock-in of these assets. As we know, I think quite well, mineral resources take decades to develop. They're in operation for even more decades, and the decommissioning, the management of tailings are decades-long, perhaps even centuries-long projects. A few years ago, we had a major mine tailings dam disaster in Brumadinho in Brazil, and that was sort of the catalyst for the Global Tailings Management Institute that UNEP has recently set up over the past few years. And it's only when huge crises like this happen that we come together to take action in these different areas. And the consultation of indigenous peoples, of local communities, of youth is nowhere near enough what it should be, because we're too focused on the fundamental assumption that we can make more money off of mining these things, and that leads to development. So I think there are a lot of entrenched factors that contribute to the current extractivist model. And I think until we change these incentives quite radically, it remains, the logical thing to do.
Thank you, Gibbon. Yes, I agree that certainly we need to revisit the incentive that still incentivize unsustainable minerals extraction. And you also mentioned that we need to shift away the fundamental assumption, and which is very critical. And thank you very much for highlighting your experience as well. You mentioned also that we have exhaust. He mentioned natural capital, social capital, and human capital. I mean, if we could redirect this to a much more productive manner, certainly we could move away, or if I say redirect our pathway to a much more sustainable pathway towards mineral stewardship. Thank you, Gibbon. And now I would like to go to Frankie. Mr. Frankie, thank you for joining us. He's from the Society of Native Nations, S.9, and he's now serving as the co-facilitator of the Indigenous Peoples Major Group. We have CYMG here now. He's from IPMG, and then he's also the UNEP co-chair for MGFC. So, Mr. Frankie, I would like to ask, how have the livelihoods, homes, and communities of indigenous people been impacted by minings and extractive activities? And, if we, let's say, propose to intensify efforts to promote FPIC, free, prior, and informed consent, what will be the needed actions to accelerate those efforts? And if you have also any ideas about how to ensure that it remains, all of this action deliver an equitable distribution of financial and technological benefits from the extraction of minerals, please. Frankie, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. First and foremost, thank you to all the colleagues. Good day to each and every one of you, the relatives and young, powerful change makers and leaders of today that are in the room. For the perspective of indigenous peoples, mining and extractive activities have systematically undermined our livelihoods, homes, communities. Projects are frequently authorized on our lands and territories without free, prior, and informed consent, leading to displacement, loss of access to hunting, fishing, and agriculture, and the destruction of sacred sites and sacred burial grounds. Women, children, elders, and persons with disabilities often bear the heaviest burdens, including increased care work, exposure to violence, and social fragmentation. In many cases, the arrival of extractive projects is accompanied by militarization, criminalization of indigenous human rights defenders, and restrictions on participation in decision-making. In terms of benefits, the reality is that financial and technological returns are rarely shared equitably with indigenous peoples. Revenues flow to corporations and states' budgets, while communities absorb the environmental, social, and intergenerational costs, where benefit sharing agreements exist. They are framed as voluntary corporate social responsibility rather than as rights-based obligations with limited transparency and weak accountability. Technology transfer and meaningful participation in value chains are minimal, and most jobs offered are short-term, low-wage positions that do not compensate for the permanent loss of health, land, water, and cultural continuity. When we're talking about free, prior, and informed consent, I would say introducing free, prior, and informed consent and informed consent into mineral resource governance is not a procedural detail that is that's being pushed. It is a structural change grounded in the right of indigenous peoples to self-determination, as affirmed in the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and repeatedly reinforced by UN human rights mechanisms. FPIC moves us from extractive projects imposed on indigenous peoples to decisions that must be taken with and crucially by indigenous people. In practical terms, embedding FPIC means that no concession, exploration license, or mining permit affecting indigenous lands, territories, and resources should be granted before indigenous peoples have had the opportunity with adequate time, information, and assesses the project according to their own decision-making institutions and to give or withhold consent. Must be ongoing, not a one-time signature, and it must be revocable if conditions or impacts change. FPIC will safeguard welfare and well-being when it is implemented through national legislation that explicitly incorporates UNDRIP standards, recognizing indigenous land, territory, and resources, rights, and making FPIC a legal precondition for approvals. Strong due diligence objections on companies and financiers consistent with the UN guiding principles on business and human rights, including independent human rights and environmental impact assessments that are critically appropriate, culturally appropriate, and gender responsive. Support for indigenous governance and knowledge systems, including resources for indigenous peoples to access independent legal, technical, and scientific advice, and to develop and implement their own free, prior, and informed consent and engagement protocols. Effective monitoring and accountability mechanisms, including access to justice, reparations, and grievance mechanisms co-designed with indigenous peoples, and the recognition of the right to say no to projects that are incompatible with their rights, survival, and well-being. So properly implemented, FPIC rebalances power in decision-making. It transforms mineral governance from a model of extraction and disposition into one where indigenous people's rights, welfare, and long-term relationship with their lands and oceans are their starting point, not an afterthought. There is no such thing as just transition without human rights-based approaches. Safeguards for human health and the environment must be the foundation of governance, or we will move from one extractive, harmful process and actions to another. Thank you.
Thank you for your intervention. I would like to first appreciate for the mention of the UN Guiding Principles on Business and Human Rights. This has been also lately quite a dynamic discussions within the civil society spaces, especially the guiding principles could serve its purpose if all stakeholders are aware about it, and maybe the homework will be how to amplify and advocate more for these principles to be obliged by the stakeholders from the industries and etc. Thank you also for bringing up your points regarding moving away from mere corporate social responsibilities to a much more rights-based actions by the industries for the local community and the indigenous people. So we have heard from the UNEP, we have heard from the indigenous people, we have heard from the youth, and now we would like to hear from the communities who are dealing with this issue on the ground also. We have the privilege to hear directly from Bantai Kita, Philippines. From Bantai Kita, Philippines, will be represented by Netanya Escote. Netanya, are you there in Zoom? Please unmute yourself
Hi.
if you hear me.
Hello, I can hear you.
Okay, just wanted to ask you briefly, and if you could intervene maybe within 3 minutes. We rarely discuss, or we are rarely exposed to the detailed pictures of how extractive activities impact rural and indigenous people. So, what are the community-based impacts of the transition? What are some examples that you can see or share with us, from the communities on the ground when we are trying to transition in mineral mining sector, and is there any particular case that you want to highlight? Thank you.
I think to highlight coming from the Philippines, we are the second largest exporter of nickel, a key component for the energy transition. And a lot of the concentration of the mineral extraction is happening on indigenous people's ancestral domains. And so, yes, there are a lot of examples of issues and from host community. And some that we can highlight is, to begin with, since as mentioned earlier, a lot of them are not even aware that it is nickel of energy transition, let alone justice in the energy transition, that kind of dialogue. Other examples are the fact that there are subcontractual work in this value chain, in this labor chain. Therefore, because of this subcontractual layering, the grief mechanisms, accountability mechanisms get blurry. And because of that, things like hazard pay and protection regarding their wages are difficult to tend to. Another really concerning observation that we have is the rise of shadow economies, particularly sex labor, as there's an introduction of foreign groups or workers coming from other places that enter these communities, and there is a rise of sexually transmitted infections and diseases to the local host communities. And speaking about women, a lot of the local women have the problem of not having access to the technical job opportunities. They are often confined to the informal, undervalued mining adjacent labor, as they are not having access to the training to even look forward towards receiving salaries that could be brought back into their communities and invested back into their communities. And so this is a deep, troublesome burden for women, among many things, on top of the fact that they are facing the loss of land, and it has generational impact on the traditional ecological knowledge, as they're the traditional care workers tending to their ancestral domains. And in the Philippines, although mining companies are required to provide at least 1.5% of their operating costs to go into social development and management programs, there is difficulty in accessing, planning, preparing, or even the capacitation of communities to meaningfully engage with this drop in the bucket. And that's not even including the indigenous royalties. And so I think to wrap it up, human rights defenders in the Philippines are constantly on top in the world for one of the most dangerous countries to be an environmental defender. And our host communities, when they are able to negotiate and engage and attempt to speak up about their conditions and demand accountability and justice, there is also danger at that level. And so in this dialogue towards just energy transition, there is really a loud call for transparency, accountability, and continuous justice for the entire supply chain and value chain.
Thank you, Netanya, for the intervention. I would like to appreciate you for bringing up regarding environmental human rights defenders, because we have seen, of course, indeed, a concerning trend where criminalization of those human rights defenders are increasing lately, and it's something notable in Asian countries, I have to say. But yeah, thank you very much for bringing your on-ground experience. Now, I would like to yield back the floor to Cohen Lee. Cohen, feel free to carry on forward for the last panel speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Samuel. So yes, now we would like to invite Layla from Indonesia. And before Layla intervenes, I think I would love to raise some questions that actually nicely ties in the previous interventions and what Layla is about to share with us. So the message throughout Sauda's presentation and the panelist speakers has been clear that demand is soaring, fueled by energy transition, trade restrictions, digital renewable energy transition, and the environmental costs associated to virgin materials mining is stark. So not to mention only the climate and biodiversity impacts, but just like how Netanya and Frankie have intervened, the social impacts, the impacts felt by the livelihoods and in the rural and indigenous communities is stark. And these impacts are like Netanya mentioned on the low quality jobs, some of the really unforeseen impacts that are brought in by the subcontracted nature of the work is also something that we do not listen about every day. So I think this is where the role of technology comes in, just like how Samuel asked earlier. And we often have the tendency about talking about the smart and the recent digitalization technologies and how these can actually help us track more data, increase transparency, which are important. But what I would love to highlight today particularly is some of the recycling technologies that will carry a huge role into securing and diversifying the demands of critical minerals. And so we would love to invite Layla from Indonesia and PT Mukti Mandari from which is a e-waste to minerals recycling facility and is doing an amazing job leading a lot of collaborative work with different industries, not only e-waste but also telecom, and is generating a high quality of secondary minerals and also generating a lot of climate associated insights throughout their work. So Layla, I would like to pose you two questions. One, we would love to learn more about what Petit Mukti does and how it contributes from e-waste to minerals recycling work, and what have you recovered and how has this work been so far? And question number two, on what further governmental, financial, and technological support would you like to see to drive this industry-led innovation and technological advancement to diversify mineral supply chains? The floor is yours. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Koen, and also CUIMG, first of all, for inviting me. And I'm so honored to be here today with all of you who has the same vision in driving towards mineral stewardship. And yeah, as Koen mentioned, so Mukti, for those of you who doesn't know, Mukti is an e-waste recycling company from Indonesia. We are based in Indonesia that is shifting towards what we so-called urban mining, that so we basically extract precious metals and critical minerals from the source waste of electronic and electrical equipments. So we recover and refine by steps of technological and chemical processes such as magnetic separation, granulation, electrowinning, and induction smelting, which will then we recover metals and minerals such as copper, silver, gold, and we also work on other critical minerals such as platinum and palladium. And so with these businesses, we have been here since around 2000. And to be honest, we have been received well from the government of Indonesia, as we have been invited most of the sometimes to the forum group discussions and also high-level meetings to especially recently to formalize the EPR for e-waste in Indonesia. We are also members of ITU. We are also participating in the Basel, Rotterdam, Stockholm conventions in Geneva sometimes. And we will also be visited by GIZ Germany on Tuesday. And we will welcome some of industry from Germany in waste recycling. So yes, this is what we have done. So the mineral stewardship is really, the terms of urban mining is really, some of you might not know, and some of the industry might not know. So it's really niche and something that is something like the future. So that's kind of the first question. And also, I'd like to mention that Koen also visited our facility some times ago, and we're really honored that it is received well. And yeah, so moving forward to the second question, Koen asked about what are the, reflecting on our experience, what further governmental, financial, and technological support that we would like to see. So first of all, these three points are really necessary in terms of scaling the mineral stewardship and driving industry-led innovations in terms of shifting towards large-scale conventional mining to urban mining, as I said. So first of all, government intervention is vital in creating a stable and predictable policy environment, which then significantly impacts how the market and supply chain flow. What I learned from being in Mukti and my recently my master's in UK, global North countries like the UK have a policy strategy specifically for precious metals and minerals. While countries like Indonesia is a bit slow, even as I mentioned, EPR for e-waste have not been formalized. And this hinders our business to some extent and even to scale to grasp, kind of shifting the conventional mining. And government intervention is also important to drive awareness of what the circular economy really means in the context of mining, and that shift from depending on large-scale conventional mining to urban mining is really the future. So it's really necessary. The second thing is financial support is equally important. Many industry innovations, especially involving metallurgical and urban mining processes like what we do, require significant upfront investment that offer delayed returns. Access to blended finance, low interest loans, and risk sharing mechanism can help companies like Mukti scale promising technologies and diversify funding streams. And last but not least, technological support is necessary to maintain momentum and scale, especially in the global south countries like Indonesia, where big mining facilities are. Funded research centers and data platforms could reduce barriers. More holistic, grounded, multi-stakeholder collaboration is really necessary between industry, universities, and research institutions would further accelerate innovation, particularly in improving recovery efficiency. And also, what I like to mention is about data. In this sector, I feel like from our experience, data is most of the time overlooked. Like, for example, as we start from e-waste recycling, we monitor like how data is perceived in the global scale. For example, we have the e-waste monitor from the UNEP, and we can see how countries perform in terms of how they collect and how e-waste generated in each countries, but countries in global south mostly they don't really have that data, and it's really necessary to then data is not overlooked, and sometimes it can be stopped in product level, and that's why we also want to promote material traceability, to shift from we collected it to we know where it went, how it was processed, and how much recycled content enters supply chain and re-enter production. So we really boost that mineral stewardship and close that circularity gap. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Leila. I think that has been fascinating insights. And in the interest of time, I think just highlighting two things. One, I think the policy environments, policy, let's say, ecosystem to support your activities, including the EPR system, as well as the importance of data and how much of your activity on its own actually can contribute to these figure-supported, evidence-based insights will be two crucial, let's say, enabling factors to continue supporting these recycling work. Thank you so much. I'll pass it back to Samuel and to the hall so we can move on to the Q&A session and session closing. Thank you very much.
Terima kasih, Leila. Terima kasih, Ko Eun. Thank you very much for the intervention and discussion, interesting insights. And now I would like to call. We only accept. Let's see. If you propose a question, make it quick, under 10 seconds. Thank you. Can we do that? Okay. Any question? Yes, please be rapid. Thank you.
So, hi, Samuel. My question is supposed to go to Saudia. And my question is, has UNEP made any other partnerships with other UN agencies in protecting people who are in indigenous areas who are experiencing violations of their rights because of the mining?
Thank you. Any other one question? Last question? Okay. Gentleman in the back, in the very back, please walk to the nearest microphone. Yes.
Thank you. I have one question. And first, I would like to make this that as someone working with local communities and youth innovators in East Africa, I see firsthand our African communities like cobalt, lithium, and rare earths are essential for producing solar PVCs, batteries, and other clean energy technologies. But yet, most of these minerals are exported as raw materials, limiting local value addition, job creation, and industrial development. Today we are discussing how
Yes, sir. Your question
can be included. So my question is, what concrete strategies can UNEP and the governments implement to support local mineral processing and value addition so Africa can move from exporting raw materials to finished products
value addition
and also builds its clean energy industries from the minerals?
Okay, thank you. So I would like to rephrase the first question from the lady. Maybe Gyubin, you can tackle that. If I rephrase the question, what can you do to expand cooperation that could achieve this goal? What can we advise or recommend to UNEP? Maybe Gyubin briefly to tackle the first question.
I don't have a strong view on what UNEP is doing and what sort of initiatives they are leading in terms of indigenous peoples or migration due to these impacts. But I think to take a broader point on the landscape of environmental action or partnerships to tackle value addition, creating decent green jobs for young people especially, there are a lot of initiatives in Africa, Latin America, which are historically the exporters of raw materials to enhance the value chains and to make them, as the second intervention mentioned, the exporters of final refined value-added products. And so I think there are the beginnings of a grand strategy on how to make sure that those communities most impacted by mining are the ones that can benefit also the most from it. And I think UNEP has a role to play in being the environmental conscience of this whole project. And I think that's where the draft resolution proposed by Colombia and Oman at this YEA is so important. And it could lay the foundation for a global compact on how we tackle the issue of benefit sharing and benefit and risk sharing when it comes to mining in the context of the transition. Thanks.
Thank you. Now to Frankie. I just want to ask you briefly. The gentleman over there mentioned value addition. Of course, I have to say, some local communities even benefits from the existence of those value addition mining areas. For example, in Indonesia, in Morowali, in Maluku province, although the extraction may not be fully sustainable, but the local communities think that the existence of the minings there are giving them economic benefits because they can do work and it's giving them GDP growth in the province. So how to address this? The indigenous people and the local community who are pro to the minings because they gain economic benefits. Maybe if you have any thoughts on that, Frankie. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think that first and foremost, like I said earlier, I don't believe, and many of the mechanisms for indigenous peoples don't believe that there's a such thing as just transition without safeguards for human health and environment. And that also includes making sure that we are part of the decision-making process at all levels, and not just looking at short-term benefits, but the long-term, benefits or negative impacts to those that are most vulnerable in these communities that are taking on the brunt of the first and foremost impacts, whether it be economically viable or not. When we're talking about the rights-based, and not so much the rights-based approaches, but the right to development, it's also having the right to non-development in our communities if it threatens the well-being of the community, their culture, their spirituality, their way of life, and their overall well-being, right? So I think that having those discussions, and it's really critical that we have those discussions and implement international law, customary law that is affirmed by UNDRIP, and ensuring that every article under UNDRIP is enforced, especially free, prior, and informed consent and the right to governance, and making sure that again we are a part of every decision-making process during the beginning, middle, and end stages.
Noted, thank you. And now, before I close the session, I would like to pass the floor to Ko-eun if she has any thoughts on this to summarize.
Thank you so much, Samuel, and thank you to all speakers and everyone who has participated in the session. It actually has been a lot of the insights that are interweaved, interlinked together, and a lot of the times that we don't necessarily see together. And starting from the beginning, and not just the stock take and the environmental social impacts of mining and extractive activities, but actually moving into the panel discussion, highlighting how it is linked to how we view and value our economy and economic systems, the traditional sort of growth-focused metrics perpetrating the exploitation of human and social and cultural capitals. I think also constantly giving the basis of unregulated, underchecked extractive activities, constantly perpetuating the current state of the world. And I think the very stark pictures that we have seen from Frankie and Natanya from the Philippines, from Bantay Kita, is also something that we may not necessarily relate to as our realities, but also it is very much the lived, felt experiences by these communities. And like how the two questions and the last answers from the Q&A session summarized, without equitable both benefits and risk-sharing mechanisms, we won't be able to transition away from the extractivism and towards the stewardship nature of minerals governance. And hence, recalling again the importance of the ongoing negotiation for the resolution sponsored by both Colombia and Oman, which includes one of the key principles on actually inviting all member states, all major groups and interest groups into the suggested working group structure, so that we can actually pave this groundwork towards a compact, towards an international mechanism to better regulate both extractive activities, mining, as well as regulating the demands and supplies of critical minerals. So thank you very much for all the participants and panelists. And I think it's only the beginning to this conversation, and hopefully YEA-7 can also host us better grounds for conversations throughout on this topic of minerals governance. Thank you very much. Back to you, Samuel.
Thank you, Ko-eun. With that being said, I would like to deliver a key message to all of us here, the youth, the children and youth. Our battle is still ongoing. We have the draft resolution, as the previous speakers mentioned. We have a DR sponsored by Colombia, co-sponsored by Oman, on the environmentally sound management of minerals and metals. The DR originally intends to establish a working group that will explore and research upon the options of the future international instruments governing minerals and metals. And as youth, our fight is real, which is to ensure that the working group can deliver ambitious result, can deliver a result that is beneficial for the global community, and not just another project-based platform that has one-off impacts. We need a sustained impacts. And a future instrument governing minerals and metals is a way for us to address this and to ensure the benefit sharing, protection to the indigenous people, environmental conservation, biodiversity protection, everything that we aspire in minerals and metals are included in a much more stipulated manner and recognized by the international community. So we've hoped that it's supposedly no longer a concept, but rather a framework for our sustainable future. Thank you very much. Round of applause to all speakers and the committees who are working hard for this session. My name is Sino Samuel Jose of the Republic of Indonesia, and hereby I would like to close this session. Thank you. And to all speakers, please line up in the front, if we can, in front of the rostrum to have a photo session. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.